that all of the numbers that are provided publicly are provided ultimately by Hamas. And so given the way that Hamas has misled the public, most recently with respect to the explosion at the hospital last week that they claimed was an Israeli airstrike, when our assessment is that is not accurate, we don't trust Hamas. Now, so what is
that number in your view?
We don't, the point I just said is we don't have a way of accurately assessing that number.
Is it in the thousands? Is it in the thousands?
See, I say there are a number, but I cannot stand here and give you without, there is not a United States body, there's not a United Nations. Israel is conducting what, in our assessment, are legitimate military operations to try to take out the terrorist group.
The president yesterday said that he had no confidence whatsoever in the numbers given by the number of Palestinians killed in Gaza. The Hamas is publishing today a list of names of 7,000, I think, people. That's the number that they're giving. What credibility at all do you give to that? And how can they, because obviously the president didn't get into numbers, and he said, innocent civilians will be killed, but he really said he had no confidence whatsoever in the numbers. Do you have any numbers from the Israeli side, or ways to compare?
So I will note, just for the record, that the president also noted that we mourn the loss of every civilian life, and that includes innocent Palestinians who have had their lives taken over the course of this conflict, and something the secretary has made clear on a number of occasions. But it is true that all of the numbers that are provided publicly are provided ultimately by Hamas. And so given the way that Hamas has misled the public, most recently with respect to the explosion at the hospital last week that they claimed was an Israeli airstrike, when our assessment is that is not accurate, and we have released information about that. The Israeli government has released information about that. We don't trust Hamas. Now, we don't have any way to make an accurate assessment of our own about the number of civilians who have died in Gaza. There's not an independent body that's operating in Gaza that can provide an accurate number. But we do have skepticism about everything that Hamas says. But that said, obviously a number of civilians have died, which is why we're working to do everything we can to minimize civilian harm and get humanitarian assistance into the civilians in Gaza.
Can I follow up on that one?
Let me go ahead, Saeed.
Yeah, thank you.
You said that given the fact on the ground, there are a number of Palestinians that have died. So what is that number in your view?
So what is
that number in your view?
We don't. The point I just said is we don't have a way of accurately assessing that number.
Is it in the thousands? Is it in the thousands?
See, I say there are a number, but I cannot stand here and give you without. There is not a United States body. There's not a United Nations body. There's not a credible body that is in there assessing the number. But let me just say that we know it's a significant number of people have died. We mourn the loss of every one of those civilians, and that is why we are doing everything we can to make clear to the Israelis that they need to operate in a way that minimizes civilian harm, and that we are doing everything we can to get humanitarian assistance in for the benefit of innocent civilians. We just are unable to offer our independent confirmation of the number because there's no independent body that is making assessments. The only organization that is currently giving this number is Hamas, and obviously we don't trust Hamas.
Okay, but just to follow on what the president said, that this is war, and in war people die and so on and all these things. What would be acceptable for the United States? I mean, do you have a figure that can be acceptable that would push the government of the United States that has a great deal of leverage on Israel to say, okay, the time has come for a ceasefire?
Saeed, I think you were conveniently leaving out a number of things that the president said yesterday. The president said, as he said repeatedly, as I just said, that we mourn the loss of every civilian life, and he's talked about how in direct conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he has made clear that Israel needs to operate consistent with international humanitarian law. Let me put it this way. We do not want to see one innocent civilian die. We don't want to see an innocent civilian die in Israel. We don't want to see an innocent civilian die in Gaza. The fact is, Hamas continues to use innocent civilians as human shields. Israel is conducting what, in our assessment, are legitimate military operations to try to take out the terrorist group that that attacked them on October 7th. They
Right.
need to do so in a way that minimizes civilian harm, and at the same time, we need to do everything we can to get humanitarian assistance in.
So do you believe that Israel is following the laws of war in this case? I mean, looking at that entire neighborhoods were completely wiped out.
Again, as I said, we talked about this the other day. I'm not able to sit up here and offer an assessment of individual strikes. I will say that our expectation is that they need to follow the laws of war and they need to follow international humanitarian law. And that means not deliberately targeting civilians, which we do not believe they are doing. It means operating in a way that minimizes civilian harm when they are trying to take out legitimate terrorist organizations.